person who is going to be introducing Ms. Dangarembga. This is going to be Philip Brian Harper. Professor Harper is the Eric Maria Remarque Professor of Literature. And he's also the Dean of the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences here at NYU. Among his many fellowships and honors are the American Council of Learned Societies Fellowship, the National Endowment for the Humanities Fellowship, and the Ford Foundation Postdoctoral Fellowship. He is a literary scholar and cultural critic who is concerned primarily with 20th and 21st century American fiction. And with aspects, it's not a one? Yeah. It's okay? Yeah. And with aspects of lived experience in the contemporary United States, including the negotiation of racial, gender, and sexual identities, and various modes of mass cultural production, circulation, and consumption. His first book, Framing the Margins, The Social Logic of Postmodern Culture, published by Oxford University Press in 1994, traces the implication of racial, gender, sexual, and class marginality in the prehistory of postmodernist fiction. Are We Not Men? Masculine Anxiety and the Problem of African American Identity, published in 1996, also by Oxford University Press, reviews a range of literary works, pop cultural practices, and contemporary mass media productions in order to argue that claims to authentic African American identity are animated specifically by anxiety over the status of African American masculinity. In 1999, New York University Press published his Private Affairs, Critical Ventures in the Culture of Social Relations, which analyzes anecdotal experiences along with literary and pop cultural materials to show how the enjoyment of personal privacy is complicated and compromised by factors of race, racial, gender, and sexual identity. His most recent book, Abstractionist Aesthetics, published by NYU Press in 2015, considers the social critical potential of abstractionism and is contrasted with realism in African American expressive culture. Professor Harper is currently investigating the function of the contemporary within U.S. literary culture, and he will next be conducting ethnographic work among present-day non-professional readers of literature to determine what interpretive practices they deploy in their engagements with fictional texts. As is allowed by his responsibilities as Dean of the Graduate School of Arts and Science, Professor Harper teaches courses in modern and postmodern literature, African American literary and cultural studies, and materialist cultural theory, among other topics. Please join me in welcoming Professor Harper.
Thanks so much, Mike. I did not expect that. I didn't expect to be introduced as the introducer, so I really appreciate it. I am really happy to be here, even if I'm not feeling quite as well as I would like. I told Mike earlier today I'm rather under the weather, so it's just as well for you all that you're out there and I am up here. It is really an honor and a pleasure to introduce this evening's presenter, who, as you know, is currently artist in residence at the Center for the Study of Africa and the African Diaspora here at NYU. Tsitsi Dangarembga is one of the most foremost cultural producers of our time, considered by most literate people in the English-speaking world to have burst on the scene suddenly out of nowhere in 1988, when, still in her 20s, she published her first novel, Nervous Conditions. The inaugural volume in Dangarembga's Tambudze trilogy, and the first English-language novel by a Black Zimbabwean woman. This widely praised coming-of-age story was almost immediately recognized as a classic of African feminist and post-colonial literature, winning the 1989 award for Best Book in the Africa section of the Commonwealth Writers' Prize, and leaving readers eagerly anticipating the next installment of the story. That next installment did eventually arrive in the form of the 2006 novel, The Book of Not, And if 18 years separated the publication dates of the two volumes, this is largely because Dangarembga was busy doing other things, largely in the rather different medium of cinema. Indeed, by the time Nervous Conditions was published, Dangarembga had already worked extensively in the performative mode, having written and staged 3 plays during her time as a student of psychology at the University of Zimbabwe, in which she enrolled after studying medicine at Cambridge in the late 1970s. As Nervous Conditions was garnering accolades from all quarters, Dangarembga was vigorously studying in yet another vein, learning filmmaking at the German Film and Television Academy, Berlin. And she produced the story for the 1993 film Neria, one of the top-grossing Zimbabwean films of all time, if not the top-grossing Zimbabwean film of all time. 1996 saw the release of Everyone's Child, which Dangarembga not only co-wrote but also directed, and this has been succeeded by numerous short films, both fictional and documentary, which have garnered awards from organizations ranging from UNESCO to the Zanzibar International Film Festival. Dangarembga is the founder and CEO of the Institute of Creative Arts for Progress in Africa, a media arts and social justice organization based in Harare, and yet she still finds time to write, having just last summer published the 3rd installment in the Tambu trilogy, This Mournable Body, and working even as we speak, even as I stand here, on a new young adult speculative fiction titled Tsitsi and the Ancestor of Fire. Last week, Dangarembga spoke in this venue about her novelistic trilogy and read from the most recent installment in it. Tonight, we will be treated to a screening of one of her films, followed by a discussion of her cinematic work. Please join me in welcoming Tsitsi Dangarembga.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for coming out today. It's really wonderful that you took the time to come out. And thank you also, Professor Harper, for that wonderful introduction. I'm always so intimidated when I'm introduced because I think there's already a person standing up on the stage, on the podium, and I have to go and be that person. And I never recognize the person anyway, but thank you. Thank you also to Professor Gomez for the invitation to be here as the first artist stroke scholar in residence at the Center for the Study of Africa and the African Diaspora. I think this is such a wonderful initiative because for the first time I find an institution that is really focusing on the common heritage of African people, whether we live on the continent or whether we no longer live on the continent. It is foregrounding our common ancestry. And I think by looking back to that common ancestry, we can look forward and engage with those processes that happened in between that led us to this situation where some people are still on the continent and other people are no longer on the continent. And I am sure that by engaging in that inquiry, we will find ways of going forward. So thank you very much, Professor Gomez. Thank you, Cherise Taylor, for enduring all my emails and making my stay here so comfortable. I'm also very thankful to be standing here today, Monday, the 25th of February, 2019, on the day that the entire world woke up to the news that 3 African American women had won the most coveted prize in the whole cinematic world globally, the Oscar. 3 African American women won the Oscar last night. And an African American man also won one of those coveted prizes, bringing the number of African American people to have received that distinction this year to 4. I did not plan it that way. I was so busy I didn't even know that the Oscars were happening on the 24th of February, and so I think it's very auspicious that I'm standing here today to talk about my film work on the continent. I think that the increasing success of people of color in the moving images industry in this part of the world, I think of it as a coming to representation as opposed to coming to voice. I think of it as an entry into and the taking of place in the visually manifested symbolic. Yes, moving images are also a high capital business. This is to be expected, as manifest power and money always go together. Of the different forms of moving images narrative, film is the most powerful in terms of its impact on viewers. This power derives from the unique capacity of film to engage vast numbers of people, not superficially, but deeply. This capacity of film narrative to engage large numbers of people deeply is built in to the very structure of film, both at the narrative level and at the technical level. Film narrative techniques have been developed to replicate as closely as possible our own inner visual monologues, for example, in our dreams. The effect of these techniques is amplified by the mode of reception of the narrative on big screens, which are often larger than life. To be excluded from moving images narrative, particularly film, is to be excluded from the powerful reinforcement of notions of selfhood that comes with observing that which one recognizes as me. In her 2017 working paper entitled Role Models in Movies, the impact of Queen of Katwe on students' educational attainment, Riley, in the Department of Economics at Oxford University, concluded, exposing secondary students to a movie featuring a potential role model improves exam performance. She had carried out an experiment with secondary school students in Uganda. Shortly before a mathematics examination, she had taken one group, the treatment group, to see The Queen of Katwe, which is about a young lady who became, I think she has now become a grandmaster of chess, coming out of the slums of Uganda, Kampala. In the placebo group, she took a group of children to see another film, and this film was not particularly inspirational. It's the film called Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children. And these children saw the film just a few days before their mathematics exam, and she found that those students who had seen the inspirational movie The Queen of Katwe scored significantly better on the test. This is an example of the power of films that I alluded to. Understanding the power of film and having studied film in Germany, in 2003, I founded a women's film festival in Zimbabwe. It is a woman-centered festival called the International Images Film Festival for Women, IIFF. It screens films in which one of the three major roles must be female. In 2017, we did a survey of the films we had screened from 2013 to 2017. We found that roughly 1/6 of documentaries with a running time longer than 45 minutes had been made by African women. That is about 17%. For fiction films longer than 45 minutes, over the 5 years, it was 1/7 or 14%. So, at a women-centered film festival run by African women on the African continent, between 14 and 17% of selected films were directed by African women. That is when I said enough, and decided to devote my energy to creating a production and capacity building platform for African women filmmakers. It's called the African Women Filmmakers Hub, AWFH. It's a 5-year program, and I will quickly take you through the program, and then we'll watch the short film called In My Father's Village, shorter than 45 minutes, please note, that resulted from the pilot program, which we executed in 2016 and 17. I served in several capacities on that film. I produced it as the leader of the African Women Filmmakers Hub. And actually, the story had been written in another program called Sisters Tell Your Story that I had initiated in 2004. In that 2004 program, we selected 4 stories that Zimbabwean women had written to be developed into film. Between 2004 and 2016, when we did In My Father's Village, we were able to produce 2 of them. So out of the 4, we still have 1 film outstanding. This is what I'm talking about when I talk about being excluded from the visually manifest symbolic. So, the remedy, the African Women Filmmakers Hub. What it is, as you can see, it's a Pan-African initiative for capacity building of African women filmmakers, with an emphasis on new voices and on providing a career path for African women filmmakers whose expressions and careers have stagnated due to constellations of power in the film industry on the continent and globally. And there will be no prizes for telling me why I decided on that. Having myself studied filmmaking at a very well-renowned institution. So basically it's capacity building, it's new voices, and its emphasis on providing a career path for African women filmmakers. On the continent, filmmaking is often put into the development paradigm, and as such, it is always focused on new people, on training new people. So people go to a workshop and maybe they make 1 or 2 small films, but there is nothing to support their narrative after that. And so this is why I am putting also an emphasis on providing a career path for more mature women filmmakers. So what we do is we do networking, we do training, we do production, and we do mentoring. If the festival I mentioned is the center of our networking practices, it has been going on since 2003. In 2014, we had a grant from the EU ACP, which enabled us to go beyond our borders into a regional outreach. So we worked also in Malawi, Kenya, we even had a stint in Somalia, Uganda, and a couple of other countries. That same grant also enabled us to do outreach within Zimbabwe. And the response of people to seeing these films is just amazing. At one school, we screened a film called Peretera Maneta, Spell My Name, which is about a young girl being abused by the headmaster in a school. And suddenly there was a riot in the school. That wasn't so good, but it was a reaction. And it turned out that a very similar story had been happening in the school, and nobody had known what to do. But by engaging with this film, the young people were able to access their frustration and their anger. And the riot was eventually calmed and there wasn't a great deal of damage, a few windows broken, but at least the case of this girl was taken up. And we have several examples of that nature. So in our training programs, we do residencies for long fiction development, which is a 3-month program. We also do workshops at elementary level in all the key aspects of production, and we also do on-the-job training during productions. And especially for those women who need to refresh their knowledge, we have master classes. What we are expecting to do is to produce 2 long fiction films and 2 long documentaries over the entire program, 10 short fiction, and then I have incorporated the way in which we were trained in Germany, which was also for older people. And at that institution, we always produced a film for every workshop. And so this is a very good way of training people who cannot actually go to film school, because they always have a production to their name after having attended the workshop. They don't need a certificate to say they've attended, but they actually have a production. We are currently entering into pre-production for the film Nena, which is an adaptation of a Nigerian novel called Trapped in Oblivion. It's a high school drama about sex education and a young girl's coming of age. I say we are in pre-production because the Nigerian co-producer has already started some of the pre-production issues, but we still have to raise the money, and so in March I will be launching a crowdfunding campaign for this production. We will be uploading all of our training onto a digital platform so that more people than the people who actually come to the workshops and the events can benefit. And here you see some of the young women that I've been mentoring already in the pilot program, as you can see, from different places in Africa, from Kenya, from Nigeria, and from Benin. So in our pilot program, which was funded by a micro-grant from the Ford Foundation, we had an inaugural meeting. That was the first photo of all those happy people that you saw in the beginning. I think they were thinking, oh, finally something's going to happen. We completed in my father's village, which was shot in 2016, and it was released in 2017. It was screened at in Los Angeles, at PAF, and also other festivals on the continent. We did 2 post-production boot camps in 2016 and 2017. In Kenya, we did a pre-production workshop. Well, it was meant to be a pre-production workshop, but when I got there and saw the state of the scripts, I realized I would have to do the pre-production workshop, but I would then have to do some script writing as well. So we did that. And so that turned into the short film script mentoring, which I completed in 2018. Currently, I am still mentoring about 5 long feature films that came out of a residency that we had in Dakar in 2017. And so we are speaking to partners in order to continue with the full program and also to produce some of these films, especially the long features. So we are Pan-African from Cape to Cairo. It's membership-based. We envisage having national hubs, regional hubs, headquarters, and we are run by a steering committee at the moment in this consolidation phase, and it will eventually be an executive committee when the program is fully rolled out. So far, we're working in 12 countries, in Benin, Burkina Faso, Ghana, Ivory Coast, Kenya, Malawi, Nigeria, Rwanda, Senegal, Tanzania, Uganda, and Zimbabwe. And so what I'd like us to do now is to watch the first workshop film, which is that 2004 script, which we were very fortunate to be able to produce in 2016. In My Father's Village tells the story of a young girl, Ruveniko, who goes back from the city to her father's village in order to claim some land that her father, who is late, left. I hope you'll enjoy it, and we can discuss why I'm presenting a workshop film and not my own next production, and etc. at the end of it. So now I have to engage with technology. Let's hope it'll be successful. Oops. Let's try that one. Nope. Minimize. Thank you, Cherise. Okay, well, anyway. Excuse me, Edgar, shall I turn the mic off? I should turn the mic off, shouldn't I? This should be connected to...
No, I mean, it's already connected, it should play.
Yes, but I mean this mic here, otherwise we will have some interference. I should turn it off, shouldn't I?
Here. This can Tsitsi.
Did you walk and
I spent a very big in Italy.
do you arrange the name of my shop?
My shops?
Don't want to see the position. Those opens the country can consider the company.
Family no go on that. Una banansi.
Matsik. Mambo Matsik. Matsika mkuru ndo baba wangu. Nalinga msangano wa mangwani.
Chicago. Koe.
Nyedwe mangwana. Batumina.
Kawe one. All right. Whatever is going on. The Kaole Kacheta Munie.
Again, my baba. Let's go, Papa. Hey, what can I? Ana kumatsika uda utiparadza baba. Vatu mama. Ndatsangana naye munziro. Zvino nekwamatsika. Tinoda kuona kuti vari kutsvagei. Chero vakatsika chii. Pano vachapeta muswa. Ini vakandiita bufu. Vakuda kuti iwe uite dzoto. Ndaramba. Shuwa baba. Kana niniwo ndaramba. Chiena kutaurira vamwe musho kuti tiungane tione kuti ngaite sei. Fodya yangu na iwe. Sorry baba.
Kwazwai.
Makadieni.
Makadi. Nakubatsire.
Ndokumura kubvunzawo nzira inoenda kwamatsika.
Shandirenzi. Kwamatsika kunotozosvikwa tachekerwa minda. Asumona matsika.
Oh.
Penya marata ayo ndokori kuenda nzira ino ndakadai kuti dzakanzira ikako kusvika pane marata yakambopfuurira kusvika mushoma matsika pane kamufambo asi panoda wakashika
Maisa basi. Sishikeo. Kwazwai, makabe yenyu. Uchaga chipano. Ndakuona uchibva uko. Vamnini vako, mambo matsika. Ndipo pawere pano. Havapo. Hauspenda. Dai uchiziva kuti vanhu havakude kumwe. Ungadai waenda kare. Ndosaka ndauya. Ndaizviziva kuti muchatibatsira kutora minda yakasiyiwa nababa. Handi tinodyira kukicheni.
Unofanira kudzokera kuHarare mangwana kuchingoedza. Ukatsika pamusangano. Handizokwanisa kukununura. Zisikarudzi. Tateguru. Asekuru. Ndachema kwamuri nichitoonai. Dare riya guru riri kumangwana. Tiringeyo. Musatifuratira. Nekuti kune mhepo dzoda kusimuka. Tivhumbamirei nemapapiro enyu. Sezvinoita huku nevana vayo. Musatisiye tiri pamhene. Ndoti kwamuri mukoma. Ndiregererei pane zvandakakuitai. Aiwa. Ndiyawo. Fojgai. Munyimidze mhino. Nevamwe vasingazivi ikoko. Mutisitsiro kuchema kwedu kwavari. Ikuna musika vanhu.
Mude chipa.
Ndezvo izvi.
Pacho kutitadzisa kuri ndowatoda kuona nhasi. Ngafambi. Handi.
Kutenda vanhu vaMwari nekunzwisisa kwenyu.
Makore awanda kubva pakatisiya mukoma wangu muhondo ichangopera. Asi ongororo yenyaya iyi haisati yapera.
Munhu wese anoziva kuti pamutemo ina handina mvumo yeguvamenda yacho. Saka ndinango kuti ramai muchinzwisisa kudaro.
Saka naichangani. Tomirira kusvika rini. Shuwa baba vangu wofa here vasina uripo kana nini. Munhu wese pana pauda uripo.
Shuwa vakada uripo. Nokushiramadza vakatiti.
Ndinozviziva nezuro chaiye ndakadzosera munhu kuHarare kwakanga abva achiti anoda kuminda iyoyi.
Handina kwandakaenda nebamunyika. Inga munoziva ndafambira nyaya yeminda yababa.
Ruvene, nyarara, gara pasi. Ndati gara pasi.
Ndinokupasai mose norukudzo.
Ndiye musikana wanaichitaura uyu.
Ndiri mwana wenyu. Baba vangu vaive gamba muno musha. Vakaporesa vanhu vazhinji muno. Ngate mese makapera kufa nemasoja. Hamusi kufarira kuti maona rusununguko nhasi. Igamba redu tose.
Gamba? Baba wako ndovamwari mutengesi mukuru. Kusika vanhu vese vakashaya meso, maoko nemakumbo. Kuri kuda kwababa wako iye. Chake chete angangori makaro neumbimbi ndoga.
Kunyepa. Baba mudiki chokwadi ichi.
Ndizvozvo baba vako vatengesa vanhu.
Zimtengesi!
Rohatorori goziva.
Tengesi!
Rohatorori goziva.
Namo!
Namwete suwa nave.
Namo here!
Namwete suwa nave.
Namo! uchamafisa chia
Kumbo maziso.
roko
Kwe, anokuti usiyane nazvo izvi. Tikaramba tichidaro, zvinhu zvinoenderera mberi. Mutengesi mukuru ndiwe, urikunyepera vanhu. Hongu, wakaudza vanhu kuti iwe ndivakaura mukoma wako. Ko zvimwe zvacho zvitaure.
ndinzwire tsitsi vanhu neniwo nditone shungu nekuti tigare murugare nerunyararo.
Mambo vakapedza kare nyaya yedistrict, ada kurema ega. Minda yemukoma wake akatora kare.
Okay, so that was our first workshop film, and I think now we are to have a Q&A. I don't know if anyone is actually going to facilitate it or whether I will do that and answer at the same time.
It looks like you are. And that was beautiful. I love that film. And I was a little late, so I don't know. We talked about this. That's all right.
So you can see her.
And also, would you mind using that microphone that's right up there?
The question there.
It just sounds like the work you're doing now to bring other people's films to life. It's like a one-woman film school operation, which I admire a lot because I'm very interested in institution building on the continent myself. But it just seems like a lot. And I was also wondering about the larger ecosystem of training in filmmaking, production, etc., and where you fit into it in Zimbabwe or in the South.
Thank you very much. Excuse me. Yes, it is very much a solitary pursuit. Not solitary as such, but there are very few trained filmmakers in Zimbabwe. So that's one divide between the few trained filmmakers and those who are not trained, who still make films, which is also all right. But you know, there are certain formal aspects that they are not familiar with, and then they see, when they have their product, they see that some of the formal aspects are not working, and they don't really understand why. But because they're able to make the films, they do not really want to come and find out how to engage with those formal aspects. I think this situation is peculiar to Zimbabwe now because most of the countries are investing in film training. Even Malawi, they're beginning to vamp up their film industry. Zambia has just acquired a training institute for multi-choice DSTV. Tanzania has a huge flourishing Kiswahili language industry. So about 8 million people is their market. Kenya, and of course going further north to the Francophone countries and to Nigeria, the industries actually exist. So this is an anomaly with Zimbabwe, I think. And the reason is, as far as I can see, is ZANU-PF control of wanting to have absolute control of the media. So there is absolutely no way that one can progress on merit because they simply want to make sure that their people are making the right films, you know, so you have very few reflective stories coming out of Zimbabwe at the moment. And so somebody like me would obviously not be part of that system. So this story is actually, excuse me, okay. This story is actually very interesting because it was written by a young woman whose father was a minister in the Mugabe government. He then was no longer a minister for a while, but she came up with the story quite some time ago. And I found it was wonderful that she was able to tell a story of emancipating oneself from this patriarch who pretended to be one thing, but actually was another thing in this way, which has not ruffled any feathers. I think one of the problems that we have in Zimbabwe is that a lot of the money for filmmaking comes from NGOs, and they are issued issue-based, and so they foreground the issue and not the person. And so people are used to being given money to make human rights films and pro-democracy films, anti-dictatorship. So people really do not develop that creative skill of observing and reflecting and using that as your material. So it is an uphill struggle in Zimbabwe, and this is one reason why I did start working on the continent more than only in Zimbabwe, because I was getting nowhere in Zimbabwe due to the political situation. And also in Zimbabwe, the industry is extremely male-dominated. And yeah, it can be quite horrifying engaging with those men. Yeah, but the women have kept the organization going on to what, 17 years now. You know, they've rallied around sufficiently to make these kinds of things happen. And so I think that's positive, and I feel like you don't get tired.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Oops. I got here when I think the film had started maybe 6:30, and I got here 7 o'clock. So I missed maybe a chunk of it. But the film, at first when I was watching it, I thought it was post independence, maybe after 2001, when there was this thing between SANU and MDC, but I think it was a story about, I think it's a story about somebody who went to war and came back, or was a sellout during the war, the liberation struggle. And I thought that, there is a similarity between that story and what happened around what happened in the past decade when, when there was problems in Zimbabwe between MDC and ZANU, and a lot of people were killed, and there was a lot of people fighting in the villages, and I thought that did a lot of damage, and I thought that a film like that, would be, there is similarity between what happened during the liberation struggle in the villages and what happened in the last few years in Zimbabwe, still happening today. And I think it's really sad because it changes people a lot, because it's like fighting within a family. I think that what happened post-independence is worse than what happened before independence, because then black people were more united. It was black and white. And so, and after independence, during Mugabe's time, people really tore each other apart. So I think, Mugabe did a lot of damage, really. On a second note, I think you are doing a great job, because, like you said, there's no any filmmaking in Zimbabwe, and you don't really get to see films like this, and yet they're very important. Whenever I go to Zimbabwe, I see people watching Nigerian films that have absolutely, some of them, just really about juju. There's nothing that they learn from, nothing at all. I mean, but they are not films that have a real theme or something that you get from it, So I think that, for example, Mukadota, Mukadota, I've watched and I miss him, I miss him. I said, this kind of stuff, that's what we need, and we don't get, and it would really be great if you could continue doing something like this.
Thank you so much for that intervention. It's actually surprising, because when I was watching it, sitting at the back there, I was thinking very similar thoughts, that okay, this is about post-liberation struggle era, but it could apply to the violence that's going on even today. I mean, was it just this morning or was it yesterday, I think, I saw a message on social media that said that another young NDC person has been abducted by the CIO. So these things are still happening, but that is the beauty of storytelling that really taps into the ways in which we are being human, because it becomes something bigger than the actual context of the story. And that is why we like to use these kinds of films to go around the communities, and we use them as a kind of a way to get communities talking. If you go into a community today and you say, well, what is the situation with political violence? People will not talk to you because obviously they're frightened. But if you screen a film like this and then you begin by saying, okay, so what was going on in the film? Have you ever seen or heard of anything like this? Slowly people begin to open up. And we find that we can even go as far as problem solving. Okay, what can we do about it? We generally get a whole list of possible solutions. The trouble then becomes implementing the solutions. But at least we get people thinking at a community level about what they can do to mitigate some of these challenges that they experience. So what you were thinking was exactly what the film is intended to do.
Yeah, because I think if people are in a country, I mean, not even talking about Nigeria, because there are some good films that are coming out of Nigeria. It is that if people are just consuming films that are being made in other countries that has nothing to do with their own culture and tradition, they lose something.
Yes, I actually think that this is government strategy. Yes, and you will see that the kinds of moving images narrative that we see on Zimbabwean television, it's all about the heritage and the past and our glorious heritage, or it's very shallow kind of soap opera type. And I actually believe that this is government strategy to steer the industry into that direction so that people do not begin to reflect and ask questions. So I agree with you, it's important to continue to try to develop alternative narratives as well to the controlled narratives that we are being allowed to consume.
Yes, Tsitsi, thank you for a very suggestive film. The way I saw it, I was very fascinated by the landscape, which itself, it looked very barren. Very barren, the grass is not green, there doesn't seem to be water anywhere. So it looks like the...
Africa.
Sorry?
That's Africa.
No, it's Africa, but not all Africa is barren. But the question I want to, I have several comments, I'll ask a question, is that it looks then that the investment in the land, the young lady who comes from Harare, and the villagers who gather, the investment in the land, in carving the land, since it is barren, the attachment is not merely because of what it can give them. There's something beyond merely a material attachment to the land. The hint of something beyond, I think, is provided in this debate about compensation. Because the fact that they talk about compensation means that there is an appeal, not fully articulated, to a bureaucratic apparatus that is elsewhere, that is partly mediated by the chief, but also mediated through modes of inequity, so corruption, so the question of betrayal, and so on. So that is that mediation of the bureaucratic apparatus, perhaps a state apparatus, perhaps a municipal apparatus, we don't know yet, which then makes the access to the land important. So in other words, this is a land like the bodies of these citizens that has become appropriated as an instrument of making citizens. This is how I'm seeing it. So the land itself is not land. It is land in relation to the making of citizens. So as you face the bureaucratic state apparatus, the state elicits your obedience or citizenship in a certain way. But of course, what it gives you back is broken bodies. So the proliferation of disabilities and scarifications and so on. So in being hailed by the bureaucratic state apparatus, what it gives to you is a series of broken promises, we would imagine, but also the scarification of the body, and this could be produced not just through war. It could be produced that the brokenness of the body is a sign of the brokenness of what the state delivers as it elicits the citizen in the face of it. We need compensation. One thing I wondered though is that the young woman, in being confronted by all these broken bodies, seems to be emotionless. She doesn't react to what is really a peculiar state of affairs. Now, I wondered though whether her determination to get her father's land, which land itself is not a land, but a land that is the product of bureaucracy. In her desire to get her father's land, whether she had become oblivious of, there's a moral consequence on the fixation of recovering her father's land, which consequence is that she fails to respond to the broken bodies before her. She doesn't respond even, she doesn't react even in terms of a look of compassion or anything. I just want access to my father's land. So I wonder whether the film is also not a critique of these Harari types. So this is how I'm reading, that the film, so it's a critique of the bureaucratic state apparatus, which conscripts bodies and spits them out broken. It's a critique of the bureaucratic apparatus who appropriates the land as an object to immediate sentiment. But it's also a critique of this Harari type, who can, by the way, she's wearing inappropriate shoes for the landscape. I was thinking, what is she wearing in such a landscape? So she is herself a misfit. So I wondered whether you could say something on that.
I say thank you because it's absolutely wonderful that came through to you from the film. This scarification of the bodies by keeping them connected to this land, which is essentially barren, is something that's going on even now. In 2005, we had some kind of cleansing of what the government called a cleanup, and people were chased out of Harare back and other cities back into the rural areas. That is where they know that they can sequester them and subordinate them to their will, because this land is, as you say, barren. They are completely dependent on the bureaucracy. Even the demand for compensation has to go through the corrupt bureaucrat. And so this is exactly the situation that is being depicted here. And yes, the brokenness in this case is located in the violence of the liberation struggle, but it is also a metaphor for just the brokenness of being that results when people are treated in that way and do not perceive that they have any alternative or any remedy. And very definitely, yes, there is a critique of people who are so disconnected from what is going on in the rural areas because of their urban lifestyle, that this feeling of entitlement that we can go back and claim because it belongs to us, and not engage with what is going on. There is a lot of that in Zimbabwe. And in fact, in that particular class of young people, they see a sense of entitlement as a good thing. There are occasions where on social media I have had to explain that a sense of entitlement in that way is not a positive thing, because it means you do not understand the entitlement of the other person also. So absolutely, and I'm glad that it came to you through what you saw there.
Thank you so much for that. And the last aspect of Otto's question regarding this sort of lack of response on the part of the protagonist made me think about something you said at the beginning regarding the power of film in particular. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about it. And it has to do with what you see as the different effects of narrative, literary narrative versus cinematic narrative. I mean, you know, the only reason we can tell, that we can reach the conclusion about this particular character is by reading her expression or lack thereof, which is something that film can do very powerfully. But that strikes me as different than what literature offers. And as someone who works in both of those realms, I'm wondering if you could say a little bit more, following up on what you said at the outset regarding the particular power of film as contrasted with literature.
Yes, thank you. Yes, my understanding of it, because the training that I did was practical, so my reading was my own. But my understanding of it is that when we see, we can engage precortical pathways. These go back to the reptilian brain and tapped into our limbic system. And we actually have to work to process the image at a cortical level, at the level of awareness. So the first response is at an earlier level. And that is what film can tap into, because it's visual. But with reading, you are presented with a sign that you have to interpret initially at a cortical level, an intellectual level. And that is where you get a little slippage between the import of the text and your understanding of it. And then, of course, a lot of people don't even have that understanding. They don't have the capacity to concentrate hard enough to get to that meaning. So because film is visual and reading emotion is something that is innate in us, even children, newborn babies, practically as soon as they're able to see, they can react to emotional cues visually. It taps into something much deeper. And then the way the editing has been developed to produce this illusion of reality, I believe that it has been developed very much in the way of dream language, the way that films are actually cut, which has now become the grammar of film. And I don't know how many people have had that experience of thinking, did that actually happen? Or did I dream it, or did I see a film? Sometimes it's even difficult, even now, to tell the difference, and you have to think about it and say, oh, that thing actually happened, and that thing was a dream, and that thing was something else. So it is not by accident that it has been developed this way. It has been in order to go into subconscious, very archaic levels of our being in order to get hold of us. And so this is why film can deliver such strong motivational messages, because it taps in at a very early level of our development as human beings.
Yes.
So I just have one question. So before you started, you talked about the African Women Film Hub in Zimbabwe, and then what you do with women and filmmakers, and how you've been working in that capacity for such a long time. And I remember last year during UNGA, I went to an event, maybe just a couple miles from here, and they were talking about movies and the African perspective, and how we need to start creating more narratives to share our stories with people. One thing I keep on thinking about is how can we, what's the next step in terms of how can we really break through this kind of it seems like there's this ceiling, or this kind of film that's just blocking people from getting past it? How can we break into it so that people start to see African movies outside of like the typical, like, let's say, just opera, or like the kind of like very dramatic, but really like capture, like movies that capture you? How do we start to like produce those and actually have like this critical acclaim that we talk about before you talk about the like the Oscars and the Academy Awards, and like obviously it's still very American and still but how do we start to get to that type of level of like these are African movies, maybe Africans, but these are movies that are made with a lot of just like thought behind it, and it's just like, so you know, when the person made this movie, they actually knew what they just like, they were very intentional about every second of that project. Yeah.
That really is a key question, because we are moving increasingly into a world where communication is by moving images, so that unless we partake of that conversation with moving images, we are going to effectively be silenced. And I think our governments on the continent, in individual nations, many of them, and also at supranational levels like regional levels and continental levels, have not really understood that. 2017, I think it was, the African Union founded the African Audiovisual and Cinema Commission. And if you read the proceedings of that initiative, the founding of that initiative, you will see that they're talking about employment. And they're talking about social cohesion. But they are not talking about reflection and narrative and engagement. So they are coming at it at a very instrumental level and not at the level that you're talking about. I think this also happened in Nigeria, where Nollywood began during the crash, the economic crash of the 1970s, and people had to find alternative employment and turn to filmmaking. And it was only once they had been successful that the government became interested, although Nigeria had had some film production dating back from the 1950s. And so I think those of us, and there are increasing numbers who are trained and who understand, have to find ways of engaging with the power structures, which is very difficult because the arts are not well respected on our continent, and so it's very difficult. I've been trying for at least 5 years now to engage people at the African Union about these issues. I've been trying for 25 years, if not more, to engage people in the relevant offices in Zimbabwe, and it is very difficult. I'm hoping that as we see the success of countries like Nigeria, where the film industry is now the second biggest employer, South Africa, where film contributes to GDP, that maybe more governments will understand that you cannot have film being successful as a provider of employment and a contributor to GDP if it is not successful at the narrative level first. So I think it's something we have to continue with. One of my projects is a Pan-African Arts Fund, which will enable us to fund our filmmaking and production of art in a proper manner, with funds for beginners, elementary level, intermediate level, and advanced level, and master level. At the moment, I hear that a lot of South Africans are very frustrated because they come over here or elsewhere, or even get trained in South Africa now. There are good film schools, but when they apply for funds, they are told, okay, now you have to go and have your script doctored by somebody, and that somebody might even be someone you've taught. So there's very little understanding of the nature of the industry, and I think it's just keeping on chipping at that old block. Yeah.
So, thank you for this. This was a great conversation, and the film is beautiful. I was told by Professor Gomez, I have the last question. So I will take an opportunity to ask two, but two very quick ones and two related ones, just about context. similar to Atu pointing out about the narrative, what's said and what's not said in the symbolics. I noticed that it's a very politically pointed film, but it's not explicitly political. And so I'm just curious about the strategy behind this film and the other initiatives for the films. Is there a consciousness? Is it purposefully not explicit because of the political climate post-Mugabe, or is that a narrative device? And similarly, related to context, you talked about viewing the films in different villages, provoking conversation, provoking dialogue, and the reaction of the students. And how does the changing format for viewing films tie into how you think about narrative? For example, I watched Everyone's Child on my phone alone, and I often watch films on YouTube. But you talk about viewing it in public. Here we're viewing it in this form, so we have conversations. So just how does that factor into how you think about making films and how they're consumed?
Yes, those are both great questions, thank you. But you'll have to remind me what the first one was.
The first one was about the political climate, because
yes.
in the film they mention soldiers, but they don't say government soldiers. Okay. And so is that a deliberate move on the part of you as a producer and the writer, and is that something that you have to be conscious of in your other works and your mentees' work in Zimbabwe?
Yes, in this particular film, the writer had written the story in such a way that it was not explicit, and I think that was the way that enabled her to engage with the subject matter as the child of someone who could be grouped with those kinds of people. I asked her what her family's reaction was, and she said that they were really happy and they wanted her to go ahead with it. And so that's an interesting thing, that even for people who have, I don't really like to use the word complicit right now because I don't know what was happening with them, but who were within the system, let's say, for a while, some of them are happy to see those kinds of films. So it speaks to a need to introduce these kinds of ruptures where people can find their way through what was happening to them. There are other stories which are more explicit. I haven't made them as films, but in 2013 or 14, I think it was, we produced a book of short stories called A Family Portrait, and they were about violence in Zimbabwe, different kinds of violence. There's a very different story about the liberation struggle coming into the post-independence era, and the violence is very explicit, and I'm trying to adapt that one too. So what I try to do is to facilitate my mentees to tell the story that they want to tell, and this is how this filmmaker opted to tell it. I think it's useful because I think, well, there would be a greater chance of having backlash if one made that very explicit film, but I still would like to do it, and when I have the time to get the script done and get the money, I think that's something that I really would do, and then take the consequences. But it's also good to have this kind of film, which can be seen in the country. And the second question?
Was about just the ways in which we consume films
yes.
now, and how that factors into how you make. For example, people are making films knowing they'll be on YouTube. So I watched the whole Sugar series and what's going on.
I think that's fine. You know, in most modes of expression, we have different ways of expressing. And if those ways proliferate for moving images, meaning that more and more people are going to see those moving images, then I think that's wonderful. I do think the issue of size of the image is it's relevant to the question of how impactful it is. And so I would always want us to have all the different modes, but I think that one just has to find out what works best for the different platforms that are available. I can't imagine how you watch Everyone's Child on your cell phone, you know, with all those people. It must have been a weird experience.
We're really out of time. I'm so sorry. If you could, I'm so sorry. If you could just make it very brief, because we have to leave.
Okay, I'll do it very. I thought
Yes.
it was until 9 o'clock.
No, I'm sorry.
Okay. Tsitsi, you know, what was the idea behind choosing a woman as a protagonist rather than a man? Because, as you know, land in Zimbabwe is like a rite of passage for men. You know, what was the idea of choosing a woman rather than a man?
All right, I didn't make that choice. That was the writer's choice. And she actually had a man in the beginning and then changed it. And I think that by having a female protagonist in this particular instance, the question that Ato brought up about the nature of these people from Harare actually is amplified, and so I think it worked very well. And also this idea of idolizing the father and the reaction to it, I think it works better. This internal work that has to be done to shed this hero that you had been worshipping, who was not a hero. I think the subtlety of that kind of work comes across better when you're dealing with a female character. But really, it was the writer's choice. Yeah.
Okay, we want to thank Professor